My name's Jacky Redgate and I'm a visual artist. I work across photography, sculpture, sometimes film and video. I do work quite intuitively and also, you know, my background was in sculpture. You know, I didn't have a formal training as such in photography. I did do photography as a minor, but I used photography much more loosely, I think. And if I look at my early work, I used it for documentation. I look back in my old journals and I talk about wanting to be a photographer, but I mean, I've never really seen myself as a photographer. I'm really, you know, it's like in the 80s, a lot of artists referred to themselves as an artist who works in photography, and I always felt, you know, much more comfortable with that. If I look right back at my early work, there's a very interesting trajectory to Naar, Schilder-Boeck. In the late 70s, I was casting. I worked a lot with animals, and I was casting animals from the butcher shop. So when I came to Sydney, you know, I think the reason I was looking at Peter Bruegel was because Peter Bruegel was painting the Netherlandish proverbs, and the reason that I restaged his proverbs, you know, there was a whole sort of trajectory of work before that. Sort of rather than casting animals, I began to photograph them, and I used Peter Bruegel's proverbs as a starting point to stage those photographs. If I look at Naar, Schilder-Boeck, well, I actually didn't make any objects. They were either domestic animals, chickens were my pets, for example, or it was from the fish shop, things like that. Or the globe spinning on the thumb is a pencil sharpener that I had, and I broke it up and tied it to a piece of string and spun it. Very simple. After I left art school, I worked as a window dresser, and so work to rule was, began with me looking at reproductions of window display from a 1950s book that had been given to me. There are really two bodies of work, I think, to work to rule. There's the first body of work that was really sort of me sort of working out how to work in the studio and build things in the studio. And then I started to sort of invent them myself. You know, I just imagined this structure out of cards, but it was an incredible shock when I actually photographed it, because I didn't realise that I'd actually get that one point perspective in the image. And I think that was a big turning point for me, because I started to think again about sculpture. The upright structure of the cards that I built in the studio, you know, I started to think about that as an object, you know, and I thought, well, why photograph it? You know, it's actually a really interesting object too. When I started to make the still life from art historical paintings, and I started to question that. So instead of photographing the object that I reproduced from a painting, I decided to put it on an infinity screen, paint it black, paint the infinity screen black so it couldn't be photographed. So there was always this concern with, you know, it was almost ethical, I think, you know, was it ethical to bring something back from a painting? Is a desire to bring things back as close to reality as possible. That's always been something that I've wanted to do. And when I print my photographs, I often print, when I can, I print them to the scale of the object that I photographed. So basically the print is exactly the same. Well, this is the object that I used in the series STRAIGHTCUT. I was interested in it because it comes apart in layers, and I like the stripes. You know, like much of my work, I was very concerned with lining things up. So as well as lining up the stripe, I was lining up the edge of the box with this is just a piece of black cardboard, and which is reflected in the background. So if you look at them as a series, basically what I was doing was unpacking this box in different configurations in the mirror, lining up the shapes and the stripes you know, with their reflection. They're upright like that and photographed from the front, and I became very obsessed with lining. I wanted lining the stripe up in the actual object with the reflection. The camera's looking down on the object, but it's also looking at it, so there's this flattening effect. I think you become very aware of the surface of the image as well. So it's very hard, you know, there's no texture. This is just a piece of, it's just white backdrop material. I see myself as being in these photographs. Though you can't see me, I am, in a sense, I'm an absent presence, I think, in this work. And I think in a lot of my work there is this sort of sense of me being an absent presence. The way I stopped making Straight Cut, and Michael Desmond described it as a campaign, and it did become a bit like a campaign, that series went for 6 years. So the way I stopped it was to plug the objects that I was photographing with a mirror, which meant that I couldn't photograph them anymore. So light throw was totally unexpected.
So this is that first final.
Yeah. Making the work is so important to me. You know, it's not just the actual product at the end. It's the, you know, it's the involvement in the process. And since 1998, Sandy and I have worked together since the Life of the System series, and that's when I first began working with 4x5. There is a trajectory through my work, but you know, it's not always very easy to see, and it wasn't easy for me, in fact, to understand when I was a young artist. I didn't understand, you know, why Naar Schilder was, you know, such a different sort of body of work to work to raw. I don't think you can always articulate what your work's about. I mean, you know, as you get older, it becomes easier to make those connections.